Hello, I'm Joan Landis, and today we're starting a course about the taking care of yourself and your self-care, how important that is. And there's specific things that you can learn to do that are going to help de-escalate your distress just almost instantly. And with these skills, you can modulate your negative responses quite quickly. And so we always want to start teaching this to people who are searching for more resilience so that they can start practicing them early on. So let's talk about how your mind and your body are connected. And this is just a general overview, just to give you kind of a sense of how this works. But your brain really is such an important influence in your personality. I mean, that's just the understatement of the year. But your brain is really kind of stacked up into 3 levels. And I like to explain it this way because it's a very simple way to think of how the brain is structured and what it does. And so the first level is what we call the brain stem. And that's the most primitive part of the brain. And some people call it the reptilian brain, okay? So what does that part of the brain generally take care of? Generally, it takes care of the body systems, things like your heart rate, respiration, sweating, pupil dilation, digestion. If you think of what a reptile does, that's what the reptilian part of the brain kind of takes care of. So, and some of the questions that the reptilian part of the brain can answer are, can I eat it? Will it eat me? Or can I mate it? Right? And then the body systems that go with that, the instincts and the body responses. So that's what the brain stem or the reptilian part of the brain does. It's talking about your body systems and things like that. Okay. And the next level, the most next developed part of the brain is what we call the mammalian part of the brain, okay? And that's for the most part above the brain stem, and that has different parts of your brain, the amygdala, kind of basically what we call the limbic system, different areas of your brain, and it's not cut and dried. This is just kind of a map in your mind about what the mammalian part of your brain is. So if you think about what mammals do, that's a pretty good sense of what the mammalian part of your brain does. And so what do mammals do? Well, mammals do all of the things that the reptiles do to take care of their, body systems and all that. But in addition to that, the mammalian, a mammal, they're in family groups, right? And they have feelings. They do. If you know dogs or horses, they have emotions, okay? And so they can feel jealous, they can feel happy, they can feel sad, they can feel anger. They definitely have a pecking order. They are very aware of relationships in that herd or that family group. And so if you think of what mammals do, they're all about relationships and feelings. That's a lot of what mammals do. Also, they can become traumatized. Okay, so a horse, walking along on a trail, if a dog leaps out at them and is barking, that horse will shy, maybe bolt, and that horse will probably be a little tense around that area in the trail for a long time, maybe for years, okay? And so that means that horse has been traumatized by something, and what that means is that the mammalian part of their brain records that as a potentially life-threatening experience. And so their brain will remember that and record how scary that experience was and call up all kinds of really strong emotions to associate with that memory. Why? Because probably evolutionarily speaking, it made it so that mammal had a lower chance of being killed by that same type of stimulus in the future. Okay, so the mammalian brain also is where a lot of trauma memories and trauma reactions and trauma patterning seem to be stored. Okay, and mammals can do that, and that's one of their survival mechanisms. Is when trauma happens, they record it with lots of emotion and remember it as in, I will never, when I smell a wolf, I will have a big reaction. Okay, so those are the things that the mammalian brain are very good at. Okay, now on top of the mammalian brain is what we call the neocortex, and that is the most developed, the most recent part of the brain to be developed. And the prefrontal cortex especially is what we call the humanistic part of the brain. It's the part that makes us a human. All right, so and this is just rough. I mean, it's just kind of a model for you to kind of understand quickly the parts of the brain and what they do. And so the prefrontal cortex is right here, and what it does, it does the things that kind of makes us human. So what is that? It helps us to engage in logical thinking and reasoning, executive function, some parts of creativity, parts of speech. The memories of things that are not traumatic seem to be stored in areas of the brain that aren't associated with the trauma parts. It's a little different system. And so that's why when we can't, we don't really remember what we ate for breakfast 4 days ago because there's no emotion associated with it. So it degrades naturally because that part of the brain says, meh, that's not that important. You do not need to hold on to that. But the mammalian part of the brain with trauma says, oh, you better remember that the rest of forever. Okay? So things like, what you ate for breakfast, what was on your grocery list, just things like that have no emotional association with it, they degrade naturally over time. Also speech, I talked about speech. The prefrontal cortex is really quite good about thinking about time and logical reasoning, sequences, and taking little parts out of the whole. Those kind of things are really what make us human. And it's a different type of function than the mammalian or the reptilian part of the brain. Okay, so this is really important to know that your brain kind of has different areas of expertise, and that when certain parts are activated, other parts are activated too. So here's a really important thing to know. If the reptilian part of your brain is shut down, basically you're in a coma or you're dead, okay? That part needs to be activated for you to be alive, all right? Interestingly, there's really only about one thing that the reptilian part of your brain is in charge of that we have any conscious control over, okay? For the most part, unless we're very trained in neurofeedback. And one of those, really the one thing that we have any conscious control over that the reptilian part of our brain has control over is breathing. Now that's a really interesting thing, because when clinicians are trying to influence that reptilian part of our brain, the breathing is the one way that we can affect that reptilian part of our brain. And we're going to talk about this in the future. So that's why if you've ever gone to a therapist and they're saying, okay, today we're going to talk about breathing, and you're like, whoa, I'm paying $150 an hour to learn how to breathe? I don't get that. But this is the reason why. Because the reptilian brain has one doorway in that's common to all of us, and that is breathing, okay? So if the reptilian part of the brain is really activated and jacked up, your heart's going to be racing like crazy. Maybe you're sweating, maybe your hands are tingling, you're breathing hard, and your pupils are dilating, and the hair standing up on the back of your neck. All of those things are activated, and that says, wow, your body is ready to run or fight or even freeze in place because of trauma. And so that's your body being activated by stress. All right. So the next part is the mammalian part of your brain, and that's all about feelings and relationships. It's not really good with speech, all right? It's pretty darn good with images, and it's very good with smells. Okay, think mammals are all about smelling each other. They can identify, each other just with smell. They can identify a predator half a mile away because of smell. And so that part of your brain is very good with smelling. So think about it. Have you ever just been somewhere and you smelled a smell and suddenly it brought back feelings to you? Okay. And that, sometimes the cologne of your first boyfriend or whatever, that'll just generate a lot of feelings immediately. Or the smells, this smells like my grandma's Chanel No. 5, and I remember that feeling. That's the mammalian brain for the most part, kicking in, saying, hey, we're good at smell and we're good at feelings. Okay, so that's what that's really good at. And so when you understand that the different parts of the brain have different duties and different strengths and different weaknesses, then we can use that. We want to use your whole brain in order to, get you back to baseline, to get you calm, to get you, thinking rationally. So here's the interesting thing. When the mammalian part of your brain is activated, when you have lots of strong feelings and the reptilian part is activated, you're ready to fight or flight, that type of thing. The prefrontal cortex actually goes offline for the most part. So one way to think about that is if you are running from a saber-toothed tiger, right, you are not going to be you're not going to be figuring out any algebra problems. So that makes sense, doesn't it? Intuitively, that makes sense. That when the mammalian and reptilian part of our brain is escalated, this part just seems to go offline. It's very hard to think logically and to reason and to problem solve and all those wonderful things that our prefrontal cortex does extremely well. So that's an important thing to understand, because very often when the mammalian part of their brain is activated, they're feeling strong feelings, okay? They're not talking very well, usually, because that's a prefrontal cortex thing. Sometimes they're just like, and it's hard to put words to it right in the middle of how angry or scared you are. What happens often is we on the outside not understanding that, their friends, spouse, whatever, we try to talk to them and try to solve their problems and try to reason with them and be logical, and that person just wants to hit you because they do not feel like you are even in the same room with them emotionally. It's like, my prefrontal cortex is offline. I almost cannot even understand I can't even process what you're trying to tell me with your prefrontal cortex, with your logic and your reasoning and problem solving. And so that is the big reason why, especially when a spouse is upset, that they really do not want their spouse walking in and solving their problems for them. Now, you've heard this for years. You've heard it for years. Don't try to solve someone else's problems when they're upset, but you've never known why. Now you know why, okay? That is the brain technology behind it. That you simply you can't enter into a distressed brain, that's the mammalian part of the brain. You can't enter in from here and try to connect with it. It won't work because this is offline. Now you can enter in from the reptilian part or the mammalian part, and we're going to talk more about that. But just suffice it to say that your brain is an amazing organ, and the neuroscience tells us that not only do you have neurons in your brain, somewhere around 80 billion something, but we also have neurons throughout other parts of our body. So interesting. Even in our gut. And that there seems to be a connection between our moods and our brain and our gut. And that is That is an amazing breakthrough. This is pretty new stuff. Here we are, 2017. And so hopefully there's going to be more and more research on the connection between what's going on in our gut and our moods and our brain, and maybe how our food intake can make a difference to that. So it's really exciting stuff. Now, there's one thing I want to say about the brain-body connection, and that is this. We are not our thoughts. If we were our thoughts, we couldn't think about our thoughts. Okay? So our thoughts are generated by our brain, but they're different than our brain. They're different than us. It's different than our soul. There's some other entity out there. So we've got our thoughts, we've got us, we've got our brain. There's more than just our brain and our body. We haven't quite figured it out. Religion has some answers. Science is looking into some answers. But just understand that our brain and our soul is different than our thoughts, and definitely they influence each other, right? But they're really not the same thing. And so we want to make that distinction, because that distinction is going to be very useful in the future when we have thoughts and feelings that bug the heck out of us, okay? So we're going to use that in the future. Anyway, I hope this has been helpful for you. We have a little handout that we have on our webpage, and I would like you to take this and just, print it out, look at it, fill in some blanks on it, kind of a little action item worksheet, and think about when you feel yourself, when your body's reacting, when your mammalian part of your brain is activated, and when the prefrontal cortex is activated, or when it's offline. I'd like you to think about those experiences and get on the forums and write about how that occurs for you, and how this conception of a very simple model of the brain is helpful for us to kind of understand a little bit about the basic functioning about it, how it relates to our emotions and our body, and how to soothe ourselves and all that. So, all right, it's been grand being with you, and we'll see you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.